Zora Neale Hurston was born on January 7, 1891, in Nottasuga, Alabama. But she grew up in Eatonville, Florida, one of the first towns in the U.S. founded by black citizens. Zora's father was a minister who served 3 terms as Eatonville's mayor. Zora's mother, Lucy Hurston, died in 1904. Her father remarried and sent her to live with relatives. By 1917, she turned up in Baltimore. Then, she was 26 years old and still hadn't finished high school. Needing to present herself as a teenager to qualify for free public schooling, she lopped 10 years off her life, giving her age as 16 and the year of her birth as 1901. Once those years were gone, they were never restored. From that moment forward, Hurston would always present herself as at least 10 years younger than she actually was. She had the looks to pull it off. After she finished high school in Baltimore, she then enrolled at Howard University. But her big break came in 1925. Opportunity, a Harlem-based magazine, presented her with a literary award for her short story Spunk. Zora was thrown into the heart of the Harlem Renaissance, a movement characterized by the flourishing of literature, mostly, but also art and music by African Americans who sought self-expression and to dispel the myth that blacks were incapable of producing creative and thought-provoking works. She created a helpful network that helped her earn a scholarship to study English and anthropology at women-only Barnard College. At Barnard, Zora studied under famous anthropologist Franz Boas. Franz Boas is regarded as both the father of modern anthropology and the father of American anthropology. He was the first to apply the scientific method to anthropology, emphasizing a research-first method of generating theories. He established the theory of cultural relativism, which states there are no absolutes among cultures. The beliefs and practices of a culture can be examined only within the confines of that particular culture. Perhaps this theory encouraged Hurston's writing style even more. In 1926, she collaborated with other writers to start a magazine called Fire. Some people criticized the magazine for downplaying white supremacy, but Zora and her colleagues felt that there needed to be a place for Black Americans to celebrate their culture without fear. In 1927, Zora met Charlotte Osgood Mason, a white philanthropist who offered to fund Zora's work. Because of this, Zora was able to travel the South learning and studying. Zora often worked teaching and publishing her work, but most of it was based on her travels, which spanned from Florida to New Orleans. We made the cut, y'all. By 1935, Hurston, who graduated from Barnard College in 1928, had published several short stories and articles, as well as a novel, Jonah's Gourdvine, and a well-received collection of Black Southern folklore, Mules and Men. But the late 1930s and early 40s marked the real zenith of her career. She published her master work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, in 1937. Their Eyes Were Watching God was particularly important because it provided insight into the experiences of Southern Black women. She relied on her research to incorporate local dialects and folklore into the novel. Her hope was to create a socially and emotionally realistic depiction of life in her home state of Florida. Unfortunately, her work was often highly scrutinized because Hurston's work seemed to perpetuate racist stereotypes and more. The 1940s and 50s were a challenge for Zora. She published an unsuccessful novel and a popular autobiography. However, none of her writing brought much financial success. This caused her to take odd jobs until 1959. She suffered a stroke, and on January 28, 1960, she died of heart complications and was buried in an unmarked grave. Ultimately, Hurston never received the financial rewards she deserved, and the largest royalty she ever earned from any of her books was $943.75. Given Hurston's background, it's easier to digest and look at the layers of how it feels to be colored me. It seems to be an extent of her autobiography. Even the title is up for interpretation in that we look at it and think, Hurston must be referring to her blackness in America. But it can also be seen as how others see her or color her in their narrative, or better yet, the American narrative. The essay opens by Hurston accepting her blackness. There is no sugarcoating with saying that she's mixed with Indian or any other race, a phenomenon that is often said within the black community, or at least where I'm from. I myself speak as a young black woman from the South, have often heard this, and sometimes claiming that you're mixed with Indian combats the shame of being black or plain. It's the best way to describe why some claim to be it. As the essay continues, Hurston says she never noticed she was black because being black was normal where she lived, which was Eatonville, Florida. We know from her autobiography that this was an all-black town. The only time she saw white people was when they were passerbys, and often she would speak to them as they passed by, something she says in the essay. And this shows her eagerness to explore, to blur the lines that would have separated her blackness from the whiteness of the world. In this essay, as in many of Hurston's work, she defies that racist point of view that her being black is anything less. In fact, she champions being black. While some would have said that she is denying racism exists, I believe in this work she is saying that it doesn't matter because she still will live. But I am not tragically colored. There is no great sorrow dammed up in my soul, nor lurking behind my eyes. I do not mind at all. I do not belong to the sobbing school of Negrohood who hold that nature somehow has given them a low-down dirty deal, and whose feelings are all but about it. Even in the helter-skelter skirmish that is my life, I have seen that the world is to the strong regardless of a little pigmentation more or less. No, I do not weep at the world. I'm too busy sharpening my oyster knife. Ultimately, she speaks for the beauty of her culture and heritage, and she even argues that white people still despise the black culture. Miss Hurston wrote this essay in the 1920s. At that time, the United States of America was only 60 years away from the Civil War. In her essay, she acknowledges the racial discrimination against African Americans, and by this, she lessens the impact of slavery. Hurston is encouraged by the basic rights of the black race, which they sought by the 1920s. True equality was yet to be won, but whatever African Americans have gained by then was encouraging and strengthening. Again, I don't believe this was a way of her to discount slavery, but to focus that there is more to blackness than just that. And during her life, she was a trailblazer for black arts and rights. So focusing on the good that her life could offer was a priority for her. I have no separate feeling about being an American citizen and colored. I'm merely a fragment of the great soul that surges within the boundaries. My country, right or wrong. Sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it does not make me angry. It merely astonishes me. How can any deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's beyond me. In conclusion of this essay, the audience is left with the thoughts of one of the most influential and talented Black women writers to exist, really. It's the notion of fate and faith that Hurston highlights her attributes and flaws and challenges as she lives her colored life. Please take some time to explore this essay and see what you could make out of those interpretations. And just for a little context, after Miss Hurston died, it wasn't until the summer of 1973 a young writer named Alice Walker traveled to Fort Pierce to place a marker on the grave of the author who had so inspired her own work. Walker found the Garden of Heavenly Rest, a segregated cemetery at the dead end of North 17th Street, abandoned and overgrown with yellow flowered weeds. Unable to afford the marker that she really wanted to place for Miss Hurston's grave, a tall, majestic black stone called Ebony Miss, Walker chose a plain gray headstone instead. And borrowing from a Jean Toomer poem, she dressed the marker up with a fitting epitaph: Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of the South. Thank you for listening, y'all.